The wind carried judgment that day, the kind that clung to skin like dust and whispered in corners before it shouted. Noon rang sharp off the church bell, though no one bowed their heads. Instead, they gathered like flies, drawn by the scent of misfortune, crowding the square with hats tipped low and hearts tucked even lower. Clara May Dalton stood barefoot on the courthouse steps, hem frayed, eyes dry. Dry not from strength, but from exhaustion, like a well dug too deep. Her late husband's boots had once echoed down these same boards, chasing luck like a fool chasing rain in drought. And now his debt stood taller than the gallows. To her left clung two little girls, twins in name, but not in spirit. Lacey was all careful curiosity, her small fingers curled tightly in Clara's skirt, while June's gaze cut sharper, always watching, always measuring the silence. And Benny, her boy, stood between them like a rusted nail, chest puffed out, though his lip trembled. He had his father's fire, but already knew to fear the burn. Elias Brigg paced in front of them like a preacher who'd lost his God, but kept the sermon. He held papers in one hand, polished too clean to be honest, and waved them like scripture. By law and ledger, he barked, this woman owes $200, and not a cent has crossed my desk in over 3 months. Her husband may be dead, but the debt ain't. He turned to the crowd, fishing for agreement, for disgust, for anything that smelled like power. The townsfolk offered shrugs, furrowed brows, some sympathetic looks that stopped well short help. A dog barked in the distance, maybe at the wind, maybe at the stench of cowardice. Clara didn't speak, not because she agreed, because there was nothing left to say that hadn't been said in tears behind barn doors, in begging behind general store counters, in silence beside 3 sleeping children when the bread ran thin. Elias's lips curled, like a man enjoying his own bitterness. So, he said, with the flair of a man who thought himself fair, she'll be auctioned. Not as a slave, mind you, as an indentured worker. Fair contract. 3 years' labor. Kids'll be split. No. Benny's voice cracked through the crowd, like a whip. Gasps. Not at the child's defiance, but at how it echoed in a place where defiance had long gone quiet. Clara placed a gentle hand on Benny's shoulder. He looked up, eyes wide, lip trembling again. She pressed her palm to his back, steady and slow. One man stepped forward. Tall, young, his vest too clean, his eyes too unsure. Maybe I could. I mean, if she's not too much trouble. But Briggs' laugh was quick and cruel. Tommy Wicks, you couldn't care for a cactus without it dying of shame. Don't play hero. The crowd chuckled. Tommy looked down, shrugged, stepped back. No one else moved. Elias grinned wider. The auction bell rang, a single chime, ceremonial. Final. Clara closed her eyes. And then the crowd shifted. Not all at once. Just a ripple. A subtle hush, like something old had stepped into something young. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention, it takes it. Boots sounded against the boards. Slow. Steady. A man moved through the mass like water around stone, not pushing, just being too solid to stop. He wore dust the way others wore pride, across his coat, on his sleeves, in his beard, now silvered and short. Hat brim low. Shoulders broad. A scar nicked the edge of his neck, just enough to mark history, but not enough to name it. He didn't speak. He walked to the platform, took off a worn leather satchel, set it on the table. The thunk of silver made Brigg blink. The clink of coins, precise, counted, complete, made him twitch. He opened the flap. Silver dollars. Real. Weathered. Old money. Ranch money. You ain't part of this, Hale, Brigg said, voice wobbling like a snake too thin for its own skin. The man, Wyatt Hale, though no one had heard that name aloud in years, didn't answer. He just pulled a small paper from his coat. Folded once. Stamped. It bore no signature, only the seal of the county treasurer. Payment, he said. Voice low. Grounded like thunder before a storm. Brigg squinted. This don't wipe at all. It does now. The paper said as much. Wyatt had paid part 2 months ago, anonymously. Clara hadn't known. Now, with this last sum, it was done. Brigg stepped back, lips wet, fingers twitching. You'll regret this, he muttered, not to Wyatt, but to the air. Wyatt turned his gaze toward Clara, finally. Not assessing, not measuring, just meeting her eyes like two travelers noticing they're walking the same road. Clara straightened. Something in her bones remembered dignity. He looked at the children not long, just enough to see them. Then he turned, slow as the sun moves, and walked back through the crowd. People made way without meaning to. He left behind silence and a smell of worn leather and prairie wind. Clara stared after him, not in awe, not in hope, just in wonder, as if she'd seen a thing that shouldn't exist in a place like this. Benny whispered, "Is he an outlaw?" "No," Clara said, voice barely more than a breath. "Just a man who didn't look away." She gathered her children close. The weight of their bodies against hers was familiar, but today it felt less like burden and more like anchor. The crowd began to thin. Some shuffled, some stared, some returned to their porches and pretended not to think about it. But Wyatt Hale was gone. Not a word spoken, not a promise made, just one action that split the day in two. And in the quiet that followed, Clara May Dalton, widow, mother, once forgotten, realized something frightening and holy. She owed nothing, and someone had paid anyway. The wind shifted, softer now. Like it too, was curious what would happen next. The prairie had a way of holding its breath when it watched something delicate try to bloom. Spring came slow in these parts, not with thunder or rush, but with the quiet daring of green blades poking through frost-hardened earth. Clara May Dalton had always understood that rhythm. Survival wasn't in the storms. It was in the waiting. After the auction, no one spoke of Wyatt Hale directly. They tiptoed around his name like it was a buried weapon, one they'd heard of but never seen drawn. A man like him didn't belong to any crowd. He belonged to the edge of things, the edge of maps of town, of people's comfort. But 3 days after the courthouse steps, he came back. Not to town, not to her, just to be seen. He rode into the edge of Clara's rented land near dusk, where the sky turns honeyed and the shadows stretch like they're reaching for forgiveness. His horse was tall, chestnut-boned, with eyes that had seen bad things and still stood proud. Wyatt didn't dismount, just tipped his hat once, slow and solemn, then turned back toward the hills. No words, no claim, just a gesture. Clara watched from the porch, arms wrapped around June, who had fallen asleep against her. Lacey sat nearby, drawing lines in the dust with a stick, her lips moving in quiet games. Benny stood at the fence, eyes narrow, fists clenched. He didn't trust the silence that rode horses. The next morning, a burlap sack appeared on the porch, tied neat, not sloppy. Inside, potatoes, jerky, and a tin of coffee. No note, just the offering of someone who knew better than to ask if it was welcome. Clara didn't return the gesture, but she boiled the potatoes. And they ate quiet, without praying, because it felt wrong to thank God when the food came from a man. 2 more days passed. Then a chicken wandered into their yard. Plump, feathered with copper, not wild. June squealed. Benny chased it. Lacey named it Hazel and made a little nest for it from an old apron. Clara stood still by the well, watching, thinking. Another day, a hammer and nails were left beside the broken back step. The same evening, the step was mended. And still Wyatt Hale said nothing. She saw him only once more that week. At dusk again. Horse still. Body quiet as a tree in wind. This time he nodded deeper. Then rode away. But the look stayed. Not hungry. Not lonely. Just seeing her. Not her face, not her loss, but her shape, a woman made of unbroken hours and bent spines who refused to bow. By the 7th day, Clara couldn't bear it. Not the silence, not the help, not the invisible thread pulling something wounded toward something whole. So she packed a basket, half a loaf of cornbread, the best apples from the tree that leaned hardest into the sun, a little jar of wild honey she'd hoarded for birthdays. She left it at the tree line near dawn, where his horse tracks curled like signatures in the dirt, then turned and walked back without a word. He didn't take the basket that day. He waited till night. When she woke the next morning, the basket was empty. But in its place, folded with care, was a leather-bound book. No title, just the stitched initials on the inside, W\H. And something else, a page left open. Inside was a pressed daisy. Clean, simple, still yellow after all those years. Clara touched it with 2 fingers, then closed the cover, and held it to her chest like it might help her remember something she hadn't dared dream. That night, Benny cornered her by the stove. "You know what people are saying," he said, voice just shy of angry. "I know," she replied, not looking up. "He's a killer." Clara stirred the pot, her back turned to him. "He was in the war, Ma. They say he don't sleep. That he left town after the fire. That he—" She turned then. Slow, not harsh, just full of that quiet strength mothers wear when they're building fences no one else can see. And I've buried a husband who bet our roof on whiskey, and worked fields with blood in my boots, and raised you three on nothing but thread and prayer. So don't talk to me about what people say." Benny looked down, shamed, but more confused than angry now. "He ain't like Pa," he mumbled. "No, he's not." And that was the first time she'd said it aloud. Her husband, gone 2 winters now, had been many things. Charming, handsome, reckless. He loved like wildfire and burned out just as fast. He had loved her once, but not enough to stay, not enough to change, not enough to see. And this stranger, this Wyatt Hale, hadn't spoken a single sweet word. But he had seen her. Later that week, the rain came. Not a storm, just a long, soaking sort of rain that worked its way into walls and thoughts. The roof began to leak, slow but steady, over the girls' corner. Clara moved their bedding to the kitchen, where the stove still held warmth. By the 3rd night, they were all sleeping there. Benny curled by the door like a guard dog. The twins bundled against their mother, dreams wrapped in borrowed stories. And in the middle of that night, just past the hour, when even the wind sleeps, came a knock. Soft, measured. Clara rose without panic. She knew who it was. Before the sound, before the breath. Some part of her already knew. She opened the door. Wyatt stood, soaked to the bone, hat in hand. He didn't come inside. Just stood there like he belonged more to the rain than the house. "I heard about the roof," he said, voice quiet like a man who'd learned not to speak unless he had to. Clara met his eyes. "Steady." "It's leaking," she answered just as soft. He looked over her shoulder, saw the bundled shapes. The tired room. The pots catching water. "I got cedar boards," he offered. "If you want 'em." She didn't thank him. Didn't smile. Just stepped aside. And said, "Come in." He didn't move. Only after a long pause, one full of unspoken things, did he cross the threshold. Dripping. Heavy. But not dangerous. He set his tools by the hearth. Removed his coat. And looked around the house like it was a cathedral, not a shack. "You can work in the morning," she said. "I will." They stood there, 2 people shaped by weather and ruin, watching each other in the hush of shared air. And then from a bundle, June stirred. "Is that the man who brought Hazel?" she whispered sleepily. Clara turned toward her. "Yes, baby," she said. June blinked. "I like him." Clara looked back at Wyatt. He didn't smile, but something gentler than a smile passed through him. And in that moment, with rain tapping the windows, and Cedar waiting to mend the roof, and a man soaked but welcome, something shifted. Not loudly, just enough to promise. This story wasn't over. Not yet. The scent of cedar carried through the house long after the boards were nailed. It mingled with the aroma of cornbread and soap, warmth and something like healing. The rain had stopped 2 days ago, but Wyatt Hale had not. Each morning, he returned, not with fanfare or obligation, but with the quiet persistence of a man who'd long since stopped waiting for permission. He fixed what needed fixing. The latch on the chicken coop. The broken leg on Lacey's chair. The bent hinge on the barn door that hadn't shut right in years. He never asked to stay long. Sometimes spoke no more than 10 words. But his presence filled the spaces like a steady hand on a trembling back, unspoken but known. Clara noticed how the twins changed around him. June, the shy one, no longer clung to her mother's skirts when he came near. She watched him instead, curious, wide-eyed, like she was trying to read a book without words. Lacey became louder, not unruly but bolder. She asked questions. Why does a hammer have a claw? Why do nails bend when you hit them wrong? Why don't you have a dog? Wyatt answered every one, not like a teacher, more like someone who remembered what it meant to be small and still learning. Benny kept distance. Eyes sharp, movement stiff. He helped when asked but never lingered. There was something coiled inside him, something that didn't trust gentle things. Not yet. Clara understood. Benny had become the man of the house too early. And now a stranger had walked in, uninvited, doing all the things a father might do, without taking the name. And still Wyatt never pushed. One afternoon, Clara found him mending the fence alone, sleeves rolled, sweat glistening against sun-bronzed arms. She brought him water in a tin cup, waited till he set his tools down. He drank slow, then looked at her. "You're not just patching wood," she said softly. He didn't answer, just set the cup down, and reached for the rail again. She stepped closer. "Why?" He paused, hand on the post, gaze low. Then, finally, "Because you're still standing." She didn't expect the words, didn't know what to do with them. They weren't flattery. They weren't pity. They were fact, plain and unadorned. She nodded once, and left without another word. That night, Clara sat alone on the porch while the children slept. The moonlight stretched long over the yard, and the prairie wind moved the grass like it was whispering secrets from another world. She held the book Wyatt had left her, the one with the daisy, and ran her thumb along its worn spine. The memories came slower now, less painful. Her husband's voice, once thick with laughter and liquor, no longer haunted every corner. The grief remained, but it didn't choke her anymore. She thought of all the women she'd known, sold off for debt, married off for land, silenced by sorrow. And she thought of herself, still barefoot, still breathing. The next morning brought something unexpected. Sheriff Elwood. He came riding up the road on that pale gray mule he treated better than most people. His hat was too big for his head. His coat was too short for his belly. But his eyes, cold and blue, missed nothing. Clara was washing linens. She straightened when she saw him. "Mornin', Miss Dalton." She nodded. "Sheriff." He dismounted with a grunt, dusting off his knees like it mattered. "Heard tell Wyatt Hale's been seen out this way." Clara didn't flinch. "He helps where he can," she said. The sheriff squinted. "Helps. H.M." He looked past her, toward the fence, the barn, the patched roof. Funny. Town still remembers him different. Town remembers what it's told. "That right?" he asked, stepping closer. "You know what happened, don't you?" Clara met his gaze. "I know what people say. They say he lit that fire. Wasn't proven." "No," Elwood admitted, rubbing his beard. "But when a man comes back with blood on his coat and the church house gone up in smoke, folks don't need a trial." She held his gaze, and he, surprisingly, softened. "You got kids, Clara. 3 of 'em, and I ain't here to pry. But sometimes trouble comes wearing its hat low and its boots clean." She looked at the ground, then back up. "Sheriff," she said quietly, "if you're asking whether my house is safe, it is. Because that man out there," she nodded toward the hills, "hasn't once raised his voice, or his hand, or his eyes higher than he should." The sheriff studied her face, then nodded, slow. "Well, you ever feel otherwise, you send word." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, but paused. "One last thing." Clara waited. "There's a man riding in from Carson," he said. "Name's Enoch Greeley. Says he bought a debt, and claims you're the payment." She felt her stomach drop. "I paid what I could," she whispered. "Wasn't enough, apparently. Greeley says he's got papers. Legal like." "When?" 2 days, maybe 3. He's coming to collect." He climbed back on his mule. "Best be ready." And then he was gone. Clara stood still in the yard, the breeze tugging at her dress like it, too, wanted her to move. She didn't. Not yet. But her heart was a drumbeat she could no longer ignore. That night, she waited for Wyatt. Left the door open longer than usual. Lit a lamp in the window. He came after dark, silent as always, standing at the edge of the porch like a ghost seeking permission. She stepped outside, closed the door behind her. "There's a man coming," she said. "Claims he bought my husband's debt. Says I'm part of it." Wyatt's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. "He's coming soon." He looked past her to the quiet house, where laughter had once lived and now only fragile peace remained. "I don't want to fight," she said, barely above a whisper. He looked back at her then, and spoke low. "Sometimes men don't ask what you want. They just take." Her throat tightened. She didn't cry. She had done that enough. "I won't let him," Wyatt said. "Not while I breathe." She should have stopped him. Should have said he didn't owe her that. Should have reminded him she wasn't his to protect. But all she did was nod. And in that stillness, under stars too old to care for human woes, something passed between them. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of a promise. One not made in words, but in the weight of presence. 2 days later, as the sun rose blood-red over the prairie, a rider appeared on the ridge. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a coat like money and eyes like possession. He rode with the certainty of a man who never heard no unless it was screamed. Clara stood in the yard, arms crossed, face calm. Wyatt was beside her, silent, unmoved. The rider drew near, stopped, looked her over. "You Clara May Dalton?" "I am." "Your husband owed me," the man said. "I bought the note. I'm here for what's mine." "You're not owed anything," Clara said, her voice firm as stone. He laughed. A cruel, oily sound. "I got papers say otherwise." I don't care about your papers. His smile dropped. You're coming with me. No, Wyatt said. The man looked him over. You the hired hand. I'm the line you don't cross. A long silence. Birds stopped singing. Wind ceased moving. Even the dust held its breath. The rider's hand went to his coat, and Wyatt stepped forward slow. No weapons, just presence. You want to take something, he said, voice flat. You'll have to earn it. And for a moment, the man hesitated, not from fear, but from uncertainty, because men like him don't know what to do with calm that doesn't flinch. Then, behind them, the sound of a door creaking open. Benny stepped out, holding his father's old rifle. Not pointing it, just holding it. Watching. A boy no longer. A son who remembered. And suddenly, the man on the horse realized. He wasn't outnumbered. He was outmatched. And that changed everything. But he didn't leave. Not yet. That would come tomorrow. Tonight, he simply turned his horse, spat on the ground, and said, "This ain't over." And Wyatt Hale, eyes cold as iron, replied, "No, it's just begun." The sun set without apology, casting the plains in a bruised red glow that lingered long after the light had gone. Clara stood at the threshold of her home, sleeves rolled and jaw tight, watching the last dust of Greeley's horse settle behind the hills. He would return. Men like him didn't take retreat as a lesson. They took it as a challenge. Inside, June stirred in her sleep, murmuring through dreams shaped by things she couldn't name. Lacey clutched a ragged doll that once belonged to Clara's sister. Benny sat in the corner by the hearth, oiling the rifle with hands too careful for his age. Clara closed the door and dropped the latch. Then she turned to Wyatt. "You think he'll wait long?" "No." She nodded. "He'll bring others. He will. And they'll be armed. They'll expect to scare us, not fight us." Clara studied him. The firelight caught on his scars, the thin white trail beneath his cheekbone, the faint nick on his neck just above the collar. Marks of old battles, none of them told. She didn't ask how he got them. What mattered was that he still stood. "You ever kill a man?" she asked. His eyes didn't blink. "Yes." She nodded again. "Then you'll understand why I won't let one take me." Wyatt didn't respond. Didn't need to. They both knew the cost of survival. She walked to the kitchen table and laid out the deed to the land, the faded wedding photo, and a ledger marked with the debts she'd managed to whittle down one coin at a time. "This house is all I've got. I'll burn it before I give it to him." Wyatt looked at her, not with pity, not with admiration, but with something steadier. A quiet acknowledgement, like two survivors recognizing each other on the same lifeboat. "I'll hold the line," he said simply. "Not alone." From the corner, Benny's voice cut across the room. The boy rose, rifle in hand, shoulders squared. He looked at Wyatt, not as a child looks at a man, but as one soldier meets another. "You showed me how to hold it. I'm not hiding." Clara started to speak, but stopped. She saw the truth in her son's face. This wasn't a boy trying to be brave. This was a boy who had been broken too early and rebuilt himself in silence. Wyatt nodded. "Then we hold it together." That night, sleep came thin and cold. Clara lay with the twins pressed close, listening to the shifting boards, the restless wind, the echo of footfalls outside that might have only been imagination. She wondered if the prairie could remember violence. If the earth still held the screams of other women who'd been bought, sold, taken, or if it simply swallowed the sounds and waited for the next. At dawn, Wyatt stood near the well, eyes fixed on the horizon. He'd been there an hour already watching. When she brought him coffee, he took it with a soft grunt of thanks. "Tracks," he said. She followed his gaze. Sure enough, faint imprints curled down from the north trail. Hooves. At least 4 horses. Maybe more. 1 wagon wheel. "They camped just past the ridge," he said. "Be here by night." "How sure?" "I used to ride with men like that." Clara's grip tightened around the tin cup. "You know them?" "No, but I know the price of hired guns. And what kind of men sign up to collect women?" Clara turned toward the house. "We've got till sundown." They spent the day preparing. Wyatt and Benny stacked barrels by the barn doors, filled them with gravel and nails, anything that would slow a horse or snap a leg. Clara moved supplies indoors, salted meat, water, tools, and cleared out the pantry's back wall to create a crawl space in case June and Lacey had to be hidden. She didn't tell them why. She watched Wyatt shape the land into a defense. Rope traps hidden in grass. broken glass along fence lines, buckets rigged to fall with noise if the gates opened at night. And all the while, the sun kept climbing. At noon, the wind changed. Warmer now. A smell on it, sweat, leather, and dust. Wyatt froze mid-step. His hand dropped instinctively to his belt, though he carried no gun. "They're close," he murmured. Clara didn't ask how he knew. By late afternoon, the twins grew quiet. Children could sense storms before they came. June clung to Clara's dress. Lacey drew shapes in the dirt, a man with no face and a woman with fire in her hands. Wyatt loaded the rifle and handed it back to Benny. "Only if they come through the door, and only if I go down first." Benny didn't flinch, just nodded. Then Wyatt looked at Clara. "This is the last time to walk away." She straightened. "No." He studied her for a moment, then spoke softer. "I've seen men hang for less than what I'm about to do. And I've seen women live with less than what I'm about to lose. I'll take the hanging." The sun dropped low, and then came the sound, hooves. 6 riders, maybe 7, the jingle of bridles, the clink of a bottle being passed. Laughter that sounded like it wanted to hurt something. They came slow, arrogant, as if this place had already been taken in their minds. Greeley rode in the middle, taller than the others. His coat was richer now, his boots polished. Behind him, 2 men held rifles across their laps. Another cracked a whip in idle play. When they saw the fence lines bristling with nails and shards, they stopped. Greeley lifted a hand. Wyatt stood in the yard, arms folded. Clara stepped beside him. Greeley smiled wide. "Well, hell, y'all been busy." "No welcome here," Wyatt said. "You got no claim," Clara added. Greeley grinned wider. "I got paper says otherwise." "You'll burn with it." That wiped the smile from his face. "You think I won't drag you off this land?" "I think," Wyatt said slowly, "you don't know what kind of place this is. Or what kind of woman she is." The wind howled through the grass like it remembered everything. Greeley motioned to his men. The first bullet struck the barn wall, a warning. Then he fired back, clean, sharp. The shot hit one of the horses. The animal screamed, toppled, and threw its rider. Chaos exploded. Wyatt moved fast, grabbed Benny's collar, yanked him back behind the porch wall. Clara ducked as glass shattered. Bullets chewed into the doorframe. Lacey screamed. June cried. Clara didn't flinch. She grabbed the kitchen knife, the same one she'd used to carve meat, peel apples, cut rope. She held it like it was an extension of herself. Another shot. Closer. Wyatt pulled a rifle from Benny. Returned fire. One man dropped from his horse. And then silence. Thick. Pressed. Waiting. Greeley's voice came low and cold. "You think this ends with one dead man?" Wyatt didn't answer. "You think she's worth it?" Wyatt stepped into view, rifle raised. "I know she is." Another shot, missed. Clara stepped out beside him. She held no gun. Just stood, face streaked with smoke, eyes shining like forged steel. "You want me?" she shouted. "Come take me." Movement. A rider broke from the group, gun raised. But he never made it halfway. The rope Wyatt rigged snapped taut, pulled the man clean off the saddle, slammed him into the dirt. His horse fled screaming. Now it was 4 against 3. No words. Only tension. Wyatt raised the rifle. Aimed for Greeley. But the bastard ducked, kicked his horse, and retreated behind the others. More shots. Wild. Unfocused. Then something new, fire. Smoke curled from the edge of the stable. Then he shouted. Clara ran for a pail. Wyatt turned, fired again, struck the wagon's wheel. It toppled. A man screamed, pinned beneath it. The remaining riders fled. Greeley lingered just long enough to curse. "You'll burn for this, Hale. You and that whore." Then he vanished into the dusk, the sound of his hooves swallowed by the screaming wind. The silence afterward was not peaceful. It was scorched, smoked. Clara knelt by the flames, coughing, hair soaked in sweat, dress torn. Benny poured water. Wyatt stomped out embers with booted heels. The fire died. The house still stood. The land held. But the war was not over. Inside, the twins clung to each other. Benny stood in the doorway, rifle across his shoulder. And Wyatt, blood on his sleeve, soot on his face, looked at Clara as if searching for something not yet said. She met his eyes. And for once, her voice broke. "I can't run." He stepped forward. "You won't have to." Far off, lightning split the sky. No rain followed. Just the sound of the earth waiting, breath held, for whatever would come next.